Hello writers, come write with me. My name is Mykela Greenwood. I create worlds for mind adventures. Welcome to my YouTube channel, Write with Mykela. Don't forget to like and subscribe and hit the bell so you can go on this journey with me. Today is the 14th of November. So leave a comment on how many words you have for the Nano Wrimo challenge. You can state words per day or the total so far. If you wrote for the challenge before watching the video, you should have somewhere around 23,000 words, or precisely 23,338. If you have 21 to 22,000, you are still on track. You can still make that 50,000. Excuse me. Today is also Tuesday, and today we're going to talk about Prologue Epilogue Monologue. Excuse me. A prologue is a separate introductory section or a preface of a literary or musical work. A good prologue performs one of many functions in a story. It can foreshadow events to come. It can provide background information or give a backstory on the central conflict, like conflict that occurred but continues on down the line. And maybe sometimes people don't even know why there's a conflict. But it can give that central conflict or the backstory to that conflict. Or it can establish a point of view. There are three views of what a good prologue should contain. One view says one is that it contributes to a better understanding of your plot. Two, the second point of view is that the writer can't weave it into a story without diluting the plot. And the third view is that it enhances the reader's experience without being mandatory. So somebody can skip it and just jump into the book. In my Mykela series, I had several readers ask me about the different colors of witches. So I have white witches and black witches and red witches and blue witches, green witches and yellow witches and pink witches. So I had all these colors, and people asked me, what are all these colors and what are all these colors? And I gave the colors throughout the book, but my readers wanted to know sooner. So I took some of the story's history, something that was not in the book, but it was like a couple hundred years prior. So the story's history, and I wrote a scene. And the scene was about when the division of magic came to be more substantial and the colors of witches actually became more defined or set. This also gives a backstory on the central conflict, because when the colors divided, that's when they had more conflict. I took this scene and I stuck it at the beginning, and it is a little over 700 words. Which Google says the prologue should be between 1,500 and 2,500 words. But the prologue served my purpose. The prologue I wrote served my purpose, so 700 words is perfectly fine. My readers can skip it and just dive into the book, but they will miss that information about the witch's colors. So now if they ask me about the witch's colors, I can say, did you read the prologue? And then they can go back and read it. My youngest daughter says she never reads the prologue. Okay. I always read the prologue. I read the introduction and all the credits, and I read from cover to cover, all that kind of stuff. So I read everything. But my youngest daughter, she just skips the prologue. She's like, oh, that's just not necessary. So she doesn't ever read it, but she would be one to ask me about the colors of the witches. So anyway, the next one, an epilogue, is a section or speech at the end of a book or play that serves as a comment on or a conclusion to what has happened. It is a final concluding act or event. I think I think it is important for writers to tie all loose ends in the epilogue. What do I mean by that? Well, all the events are supposed to be interrelated. All the events are supposed to move your story along to build to your climax. So you don't want something just hanging without the story tying everything in or tying everything off. In the city of the ancients, the soldiers searched the city and found no more dissenters. Life went back to normal for most ancients. Kilty received her cure and awoke. Now, in the city of the ancients, Mr. Valens found a book that talked about another place like the Ultrarium. So that actually opened up something. And I think a lot of writers will add something like that in the epilogue so they can do another book. I don't plan on doing another book for City of the Ancients. But in the story, I mentioned the ancients helping humans find habitable worlds. So the question of more ancients being somewhere was certainly there. So I certainly needed to tie that end and answer that question for my readers. A simple way to say tying off would be the epilogue serves to reveal the fates of all the characters. Little, big, whatever. All the characters need to have some kind of fate tied in. An epilogue almost always features a time jump. Sometimes a few days later, sometimes a few decades later, and that shows the reader where the characters end up. And it may or should solve any unanswered questions. We don't want to leave our readers just hanging. Well, what happened to, so-and-so? We don't want our readers to just be hanging. Even I took care of Mr. Leister because, the telepathy thoughts with Bonnie, Mr. Leister was not acting strange anymore, so the sleeper thoughts are probably gone. So if the reader had that question, I answered that. So when we end our stories or narratives with no resolution, they're often called cliffhangers. This can be very unsatisfying to our readers. However, Garth Nix used this technique very well in his Seventh Tower series. He would bring you to the climax and just stop. Needless to say, I and my children couldn't wait for the next book. But the next book didn't start in the middle of the climax and concluded. It always started somewhere else. And sometimes when you got back to that climactic scene, it turned out that it wasn't the climax. It was a good series, and I do recommend it. It is for 3rd to 5th graders, I think. So I used to read the books that my kids would read, and I tried to, so that we could have conversations and stuff. But if you do read it, I would get the whole series to avoid the cliffhangers. I think there's like 6 books, even though it's called Seventh Tower series. There's no 7th tower there. I mean, there's a 7th tower in the book, but there's not 7 books in the series. Okay, so now let's dive in a little bit to the word epilogue. The word epilogue comes from the Greek epilogos, which means conclusion word. Now, a conclusion is different from a climax. The climax is the height of action or tension in the story. But the conclusion wraps things up, gives the reader closure. Leave a comment below on if you use an epilogue or you leave your readers hanging and waiting for the next book. I've actually had a reader tell me that I needed more of a cliffhanger in my Mykela series, so my readers would want the next book. But I gave epilogues at the end of each of the first 3 books, so that it's all nice and neatly tied up. Book 4 is a little more of a cliffhanger, But by this point in the story, the reader knows the big battle is still to come. And that's how the book 4 ends, is the statement of, or the proclamation of the battle, or a new conflict to solve that should be solved in book 5. So I don't think my readers will be too mad with me with a cliffhanger on that one. And I do like to tie things up, and I was told early on in my writing that you shouldn't leave your readers hanging. That's not the way to do it. So it's still your choice, but don't leave them hanging too long if you're not going to get to that second book or that third book and write it. Your readers will get too frustrated, and then I've had books to where I had to go back and read the first book, like, okay, finally the second one's out, so I could go see what this is and all these things. Next one's out, but I had to go back and read what happened in the first one, and it's like, so I can remember, because it's so long. So don't leave your readers like that. You don't want to leave them like that, because after a while they're just going to be like, I don't even know why I'm reading this, because it's just going to leave me in the middle of nowhere, and I'll wait till the whole series is out. So don't do that to your readers. Now, our last term today is monologue. A monologue, it kind of sounds like epilogue and prologue, but a monologue is a long speech by one actor, character in a play, story, or movie as part of a theatrical or broadcast program, or a long, tedious speech by one person during a conversation. Another definition is a speech made by one person speaking his or her thoughts aloud, or directly addressing a reader, audience, or character. So it's like all of a sudden they're talking to somebody outside of the story, or outside of the book, or outside of the play. There are several types of monologues. A soliloquy is a monologue in a drama, which is an act of speaking one's thoughts aloud when by oneself or regardless of any hearers. There are two basic types of monologues in drama: exterior and interior. Exterior monologue is where the actor speaks to another person who is not in the performance space, or they speak to the audience. So they're speaking out to somebody that's not in the story. Interior monologue is where the actor speaks as if to himself or herself. It is in introspection and reveals the inner motives to the audience. This is also a common device in stream of consciousness writings, which I would have to do more research on that to tell you more about that. Another type of monologue is a dramatic monologue. Dramatic monologue means self-conversation, speech, or talks, which include an interlocutor or speaker presented dramatically. It means a person who is speaking to himself or someone else speaks to reveal specific intentions of her actions. However, in literature, it is a poetic form or a poem that presents a speech or conversation of a person in a dramatic form. A simple definition is a dramatic monologue is a type of poetry written in the form of a speech of an individual character. Dramatic in this sense means the revelation of characters or characterization. Don't worry about tests. There's no test. No, these terms, these definitions, match them up. No. We're here for fun, so just sit back and listen and take in all of these things. The next type is operatic monologue. You would use this in an opera. However, the function of an operatic monologue is generally not as in drama, which in drama is to further the action or to reveal anything new about the characters. This here, the function is to provide opportunities for the singer to display his or her musical prowess. So you would maybe even have people to write to that person's voice or something. I don't know. I've never dealt into that, but you know, it's just you go and you listen to them sing, and then they do all of the skill, you know, 3 octaves or whatever, and you're just like awed by their voice. So that would be the operatic monologue. Another type is the comic monologue. This is the type I think we are most familiar with. Comic monologue is a form of a dramatic entertainment, comedic solo, or the like by a single speaker. It can also refer to a continuous series of jokes or comic stories delivered by one comedian. To a stand-up comedian, monologue denotes or means a comic routine. So they may not say, you know, comic monologue. They say comic routine. And I think sometimes we don't think of comedians as writers, but I believe most or many write their own jokes, write their own routines, write their own stories that they come up with. And a lot of times it's kind of, some of it's personal stories. So it makes it easier for them to remember the stories because they're just speaking about things. But they would have to kind of practice it a little bit or write it out to make sure it flowed right, and you know, you don't get to the punchline in it and part of the story is missing. So, you know, so they are writers in their own right. So don't forget that. There's a lot of different types of writers out there. The last one we will look at is monologuing, which is also known as the villain speech. This is where the villain of the story will take a moment to gloat in front of the hero, who the villain believes will soon meet his or her demise, death, or ultimate downfall. Fictional villains have a habit of pontificating or preaching how said victim will soon die. Oh, what I have planned for you, you know, and reminiscing or recollecting on how he or she tried for so long to get his or her kill and is about to reap the reward. Villains may also give away the details of their evil plots on the rationale or basis that the victim will die immediately. So this speech almost always results in giving the hero time to escape the trap of death, providing the protagonist critical information he or she needs to defeat the villain, or filling in plot background that the writer has not yet revealed to the audience or the reader. This idea of monologuing suffuses or fills or saturates comic book plotting. Leave a comment below on your favorite comedian, and leave a comment on your favorite villain who was monologuing, if you know of a villain that did quite the long monologue. Also, don't forget to leave a comment on how many words you've written for the Nano Wrimo challenge, so that you can see, oh yes, I've got this many words. This is so exciting. So visit my website, WritewithMykela.com, and read some character bios. If you hit like and subscribe and the bell notification, then we will continue to write together. Thank you for joining me today. I really appreciate your participation. If you know someone who would like this video, then please share this with them. This is Mykela with Write with Mykela. Bye for now.